Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview. Our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour, we're going to be seeing what's making the headlines with PR consultant Deane and columnist Yasmin Alibhai-Brown. So good evening to both of you. So let's take a look then at what's on those front pages, and we're starting with the Metro. Their front page features a new image released tonight by the Metropolitan Police of inside Grenfell Tower. Their headline, Inside the Hell Tower. And the Daily Mail too, their headline, Inside Hell. The Mirror has a similar photo on its front page, describing them as shock pictures. That's after the Met Police themselves have referred to the footage as indescribable. The Eye also goes with that story. They focus on the £5,500 that each of the homeless was promised by the Prime Minister today. The Times has the headline, Fire Victims Left in the Lurch by Chaotic Relief Effort. The Financial Times leads with Philip Hammond and his calls to put business concerns at the heart of Brexit, warning that crashing out without a deal could be a bad outcome for Britain. The Chancellor will set out his views tomorrow in a rescheduled Mansion House speech. The Express goes with a story on Brexit negotiations, which start tomorrow. They say that confidence is high, calling it a deal that will boost Britain. And The Guardian too. The paper says Theresa May's slim grasp on power means the UK is more likely to crash out without a deal. And Brexit-related front page in the Telegraph as well. The paper says Brexit Secretary David Davis is tipped to be interim Tory leader. And The Sun leads with today's reports that Ant McPartlin has checked into rehab to fight prescription drug and alcohol problems. They say the TV star won't be able to use his phone while he's being treated. And The Star has the headline, Dec's anguish as Ant starts rehab. So let's talk through some of the stories on the front pages and inside too, of course, with Deane and Yasmin Alibhai-Brown. And a mixture of front pages, but a lot of them are still devoted to the fallout from the Grenfell Tower fire. And tonight's release of these extraordinary pictures by the Metropolitan Police, pictured there on the front of the Metro. They call it Inside the Hell Tower.
I must say that compared to all the politics of this, I've been so impressed with the way the Met has handled this really difficult situation. The firefighters we know, but you know, their spokespeople have managed to be emotional as well as a kind of very held together. They've communicated empathy in a way that I really take my hat off to them, because they see these scenes first. And I must say, it's been really impressive.
Yes, very hard work, and must be harrowing for them. They have not, of course, had their lives made easier in the course of that. There is a great deal of anger naturally emerging from people who have lost loved ones in fire. Quite separately to that are people who seek to exploit this situation, in my view, for political purposes. And marching outside Downing Street and threatening the Prime Minister, calling out government and saying they want to bring down the government, as many socialist workers marching this week.
Oh, Alex,
saying.
I really meant to be there.
Well,
I meant to be on that demo.
That's always peculiar to me. I mean, you are not, of course, this, but it amazed me. Some Labour members of Parliament were there, and if a Tory member of Parliament went to a BNP rally, which is pretty much the same, there would be absolute outrage.
I don't think the Socialist Workers' Party is the BNP.
I watched footage of a man a man openly saying that we should behead Theresa May.
Well, that was wrong, but I don't think the Socialist Workers' Party is the BNP. But I do think that, you know, this is a longer and deeper story, and it is right.
That's true.
It is so right that these voices, you know what I would have done this week if I'd been in power? On Question Time, on BBC Question Time and in Questions, I would have had those people who have suffered what they've suffered as panel members, because we don't hear them. They're not part of the official discourse. And I'm really kind of think that something's changing now. We need to not be looking down on them. I've met some of these people because a few years ago I did a little bit of work there with teenage mums.
In the tower?
In the tower. And 4 other towers. And one of the things that was said to me again and again and they were white teenage mums, how scared they were to go to antenatal classes because everybody looked down on them. And it's time. They're part of our democracy.
I think you've got a real point about how people interact with government. I'm not pretending that it was smoothly done by our government, and indeed Theresa May's apologised for the way that the first reactions happened. But I think it's very good that the families and victims went to Downing Street to have a proper conversation, not a fly-by PR kind of, someone waves at you at the scene and you get to offer platitudes, but actually went to have a sit-down and talk with our Prime Minister at the heart of our government.
But do you
I thought that was very
should
good.
have happened sooner, perhaps, at the scene? It doesn't need to necessarily be a PR stunt. It can be entirely genuine.
That's why I was saying I wasn't pretending it was done perfectly, but I think it's good that they went to Downing Street.
The more effective thing were those messages. It kind of reminded me of when Diana died, and the people were really upset and enraged, and those messages that they've been are more powerful than
I'm going to move on to
anything
another
else.
paper, just because we're still talking about... We'll stay with the same story, but I just want to introduce another double-page spread that you had spotted as well, which obviously raises a lot of the issues and the questions that still need to be answered for many of these people, plus the very immediate need still of them needing to be rehoused and needing to be reclothed and to get themselves back on their feet.
Absolutely right. And a striking photograph of our mayor, the Mayor of London, doing as any mayor should do, offering comfort to those in grief. He is in a remarkably difficult situation. This is not a party political point. All occupants of his role have encouraged high-rise because we have a housing problem, and he's in fact, in his recent time, this is not a criticism of him, called into buildings that had been rejected by their boroughs, high-rises, and approved them because we have this pressure on high-rise. So whichever political party it is, we've got this real difficulty in what we do next. Not just for the victims of Grenfell Tower, although they must come first, but what we do with housing generally. And I really think this is one of those moments that may change things forever in housing, in the same way that Hillsborough changed things forever in the way that we've used stadia. I think that we really may no longer be building high-rise in the same way.
But you're right, and it is a turning point, but it's also, we have all this accommodation at the moment, owned by people who do not live in this country.
You're not supporting Corbyn's
I am actually. I mean, it's not whether it's Corbyn or not. I've been saying it a long time.
So just to explain to everyone, just to remind everyone that
so
he's
there are all these
suggested that
properties.
empty properties
should be occupied.
Well, no, we should not be allowing this level. Do you remember when you're not old enough? When Centrepoint, you're not old enough. I remember Centrepoint going up, and the same argument that we should, absolutely, our people and their accommodation in big cities come first.
I don't understand. If you don't respect property rights, what other human rights do you respect?
I don't respect people buying up properties for investment when we have such a crucial housing crisis.
But how do you untangle that from the fact that people are entitled to own property?
Well,
if you don't respect that human right, which other ones don't you respect?
No, it's not a human right. The rich,
of course it is.
No, it's not. They're investing their properties, which is fine. But if they are investing properties and they live thousands of miles away, and we have a shortage, then we have got to have a set of rules about who buys, who lives there. You can't have unoccupied properties.
And I appreciate your point, which is that, there is a great need for shelter. There's also a great need for, say, clothing. I've got some clothing that I don't wear very often. I dare say you do too. Is it still mine, or can someone take it?
No, it's nothing to do with... This is an essential need. You know and I know, and you've just spoken about it. There's a housing crisis in our country, and we cannot afford unoccupied investment housing, which is just going up in price.
Is the idea that this is a temporary arrangement, that these people are forced to open the doors of empty flats to house people for a matter of a few weeks, or what's...
No, it wasn't simply about victims of Grenfell. It was inviting people to occupy homes generally. And it's very dangerous when politicians start saying that
I don't think he said go and
That's exactly what Jeremy Corbyn said.
No, that's not fair. But coming back to this front page, the Express...
That's right. I just highlighted this just because the story is there at the bottom. Less Inferno victims seize empty homes. I'll go back to the Express.
has been a real hero.
Yeah.
We have to give him credit.
Apologies, that's the wrong one. It's this one here, and I think he's featured on that double-page spread. There he is, below Sadiq Khan, hugging one of the
He's emerged as a real hero of this crisis, I think.
OK, let's move on to other issues now, shall we? Because on the front page of the Financial Times, you wanted to talk about the parliamentary elections that have been going on in France. Yeah.
Macron, of course, emerged from the Socialist Party in France and overtook his mentor, Hollande, to become president himself. So far, whilst unpredictable and a surprise in some ways, it was, any individual who's charismatic stands a chance of winning a presidency. Even more remarkable thing in some ways is that he gains an outright majority in their parliament now with a party that didn't exist a year, 18 months ago. And that party, this is the thing that worries me, unlike other parties which have depths of philosophical and ideological tradition, that party really only has one purpose: supporting Macron. You separate these powers out, legislative and executive, in order to dilute the ability of the executive to control things. But here, we've got a vehicle that's designed only for one thing: making Macron stronger, and it's won.
And it's a new thing, it's a new phenomenon. It's not even a party, he calls it a movement.
Yes.
So it's a completely kind of driven, you're right, it's driven by a person, an individual, a personality.
And something that only Theresa May could dream about at the moment. Let's move on, because we've not got a huge amount of time, and I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple more stories. This is a double-page spread which focuses on the week ahead and the Brexit talks. I think it's on the front page of the Express as well.
Yes.
EU exit deal to boost Britain is their take on it. A very pro-Brexit paper.
David Davis off to Brussels tomorrow to negotiate with Michel Barnier, and as it says on the inside, a deal like no other in history. It's a remarkable challenge for any politician, let alone with the issues that we now have at home. But I think that the important thing for us now to think about is that we are leaving the EU. It's time for us to rally behind those who have to do, unless your interests are not Britain's interests, unless you don't want Britain to do well, it's time to rally behind those carrying it out. Even if you thought Brexit was a terrible idea, it's now D-Day. D-Day.
No, but no, it's not. You can't ask us to rally around certain people who want to go the hard way, or rally behind people who are increasingly, including Philip Hammond, seem to be talking about a softer Brexit. It isn't a done deal. It isn't. There's no agreement even amongst ardent Brexiters about what this thing means anymore. And there are 27 other countries. Well,
so that's interesting, because, of course, many people speculated after the election result that we just had that a so-called soft Brexit was going to be more likely. But I think that the Department for Exiting the European Union, when it says it just doesn't recognise that kind of language, that's not a line. They really mean it, because they think their job is to go in and negotiate the best possible deal. That was their job before the election, and it's their job now.
OK, well, it's going to be a fascinating week ahead. We can't spend too much longer talking about that, but we can spend a bit of time in the next section talking about the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, because according to one paper, he's emerging as the favourite for the next Tory leader. So we'll be talking about that in just a moment. And we're going to turn our attention to the front page of the Daily Telegraph, which focuses on the pressure that Theresa May is under and whether or not she's going to stay in the job. They're saying that David Davis is being tipped as a possible interim Tory leader, they say. Why do they think, first of all, that he's a candidate? And do you agree that she's not going to hang on?
Well, their speculation is David Davis, on the one hand, more stable than, forgive me discussing the others, a bit more down to earth than Boris, and a bit more charismatic than Philip Hammond, goes some of the logic here. I actually think Theresa May is going to surprise people with her longevity. I'm not forecasting years into the future. I'm saying this is a rocky patch, which I think our Prime Minister will get past. Not least because the Conservative Party has a system whereby the Parliamentary Party whittles down those who stand for the leadership to two, and then those two people are presented to the party in the country. It takes time. And it's a process which is quite bloody, and nobody wants that right now. Now, the only other way to get around that is to do what happened with Michael Howard back in 2003-04, when they defenestrated Ian Duncan Smith, which is to only present one candidate to the country, so you have a fait accompli. And then, of course, it happened again with Theresa May, sort of, but there were other candidates around, and then they sort of formed a circular firing squad to take care of themselves. So the only model would be the Howard model of only presenting one candidate. But no one wants a coronation, and it just feels wrong. So I think Theresa May is absolutely secure. I also, by the way, think she's doing a good job. That seems to be a second-rate consideration. My point is, assessment of ability seems to be by the by with this sort of speculation. I think our Prime Minister, unfashionable view now, I'm sure.
Oh, deeply unfashionable.
Well, it was very. When she looked like she was in control, everyone said it, and now I'm on my own.
Well, the calling of a lot of people would cite the calling of the election, whatever you think about Grenfell Tower, calling of an election in the expectation of increasing majority.
As they say in Yasmin, it was brave.
It was foolish. And also, the David Davis thing is interesting because he's probably one of the very few working class boys made good. And I think that...
He's a great MP, he's a great minister.
But my problem with David Davis is this, and I agree, he's got great qualities. But who is the real David Davis? Because not that long ago, he resigned from the Tory party when he was very close...
No, he didn't resign from the party.
No, he resigned from the front bench because he was so close to liberty and its principles and its human rights charter and so on.
Yes.
So that David Davis was one kind of David Davis. Now we've got the opposite kind of David Davis. So who is David Davis?
You can believe in freedom. I mean, I think the tragedy from the moment you're describing is that we didn't get the great reforming Home Secretary he would have been if he'd stayed in post. But I don't see a belief in freedom from the European Union and a freedom from the state as contradictory. I see them as being together.
I'm just going to move us on so we can just squeeze in another take on it's related to this discussion. Their front page, the Financial Times, Hammond urges focus on business in Brexit talks, and as part of the interviews that he was doing today, he also had some criticism for Theresa May, didn't he?
Yes.
Is that him saying, I quite fancy the job as well, do you think?
I think there's jockeying going on. There is definitely, you know, people, and they're all men at the moment, showing their differences from the current Prime Minister. And Hammond certainly is not a hard Brexiter. The problem is, and Alex is right, he too, like Theresa May, has a kind of inability. It doesn't come across well as a people person.
He's very warm in small groups, one gathers.
Yeah.
A bit like John Major was supposed to be much better in small groups than
Now, I
was
certainly wouldn't
largely.
go for a bubbly man like Boris Johnson. So I think Hammond might have the same problem.
And would a change of leadership make any real difference? I mean,
I think
what would it
make a
achieve?
difference. It would make a difference. I do think it's wrong to blame Theresa May for the fire and all of that. She's become a kind of witch that they're burning, and it's not right, because this has been going on. The neglect of these poor people has been going on for a long time. But she didn't have the ability to respond to the situation. I don't think Philip Abbott...
But that is like the Diana comparison you were making before, and I think it's a shame when we decry people for... that we all deal with... We are empathetic in different ways, and Theresa May is a compassionate person, and you will have been upset by this like anyone else.
Okay, and there's also some people would say there's a question of leadership and whether there was enough help, and that perhaps should go to the top as well. But perhaps we'll discuss that next hour. Let's whiz on, though, and take a look at inside the Sun. Now, it's Jo Swinson. Thank you. Thanks for your help. I'm not sure if I would have found that. This is Jo Swinson ruling herself out of the leadership of the Liberal Democrats.
Yes, and she does it in a strange way. So Jo Swinson was a front-runner, I think, for the leadership of the Liberal Democrats after Tim Farron's resignation. But she says, at least in this version given by The Sun, most men in my position would have been at this like a shot. But just because a man would do it doesn't make it the right thing to do. I therefore step back from the campaign to lead my party. Why not just say I don't want to be leader? I mean, it's very... Why put it in these gendered terms? I couldn't follow it at all.
It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense.
We don't have a lot to go on there, I guess.
Nevertheless, unless they're lying, she said it.
Well, yes, absolutely. I just wonder if there's more context.
But there are lots of sirs up there. I can see you.
Maybe it was because there are all these blokes crashing around with Ed Davey and Vince Cable and so forth.
We've got about 30 seconds, but this story intrigues me because I haven't read it. Broken hearts never heal, says scientists.
Take it away, Yasmin.
Yes and no. I've always said that once your heart is broken, there's a crack there forever. Many of us have been there. And now we have research from the University of Aberdeen saying that the muscle actually suffers.
Yep.
Isn't that extraordinary?
We say time heals all wounds. It's not true. What a depressing note to end on.
Even Alex believes this.
I don't know why I thought that was going to be an uplifting.
It's not uplifting at all. For the romantics.
Anyway, we'll promise something for the next session, which is at 11:30, when you'll both be back. Nice to see you. Thanks very much indeed.